woman! Don't touch my child!
The woman shouted, dragging her daughter away like Ifunanya carried something dangerous. The child looked back, confused, but her mother didn't slow down. She pulled her harder. Women turned. Some shook their heads, some laughed quietly, and others just watched. Ifunanya stood there, frozen, her hand still stretched in the air, like she didn't understand what just happened. But she did. She had heard it before, too many times. Barren. That was what they called her now. Not Ifunanya, not the girl everyone once praised, just the barren woman. But what none of them knew was that Ifunanya was not barren. Let's go back to how it all began. But before I start, please subscribe, like and comment. This keeps me encouraged. Now grab your popcorn and enjoy the story. In the small village of Umweke, where the mornings began with the sound of roosters and the evenings ended with quiet conversations under the moonlight, there lived a man known for his hard work and discipline. He was a farmer whose hands were strong from years of working the land, and his wife was a market woman who sold food with honesty and kindness. Their home was not the biggest, but it was peaceful, and people respected them because of how they lived their lives. In that home grew their only daughter, Ifunanya, a girl whose calm nature made her different from others her age. She was not loud, she did not follow trouble, and she spent most of her time helping her mother in the market or assisting with work at home. People admired her not just for her beauty, but for her behavior. Elders would often say that she was the kind of child every family prayed for, and wherever her name was mentioned, it was always followed by praise. Just a short distance from her compound lived her father's elder brother, a man whose household told a completely different story. While Ifunanya's home was filled with peace, his own was filled with noise, arguments, and constant trouble. His first daughter had already brought him shame by running away to live with a man in another village without any proper marriage rights. It was a disgrace that followed him everywhere, and people never stopped talking about it. The two daughters still living with him did not make things easier. They were known for their reckless behavior, moving from one problem to another without fear or shame. One of them had even gotten pregnant outside marriage, adding more disgrace to the family name. Where Ifunanya was praised, they were feared. Where she was respected, they were avoided. And slowly, that difference began to eat deeply into his heart. At first, her uncle tried to ignore the difference between his home and her brother's, but it was not something he could escape. Everywhere he went, he heard people comparing both families. They spoke about Ifunanya with pride, while they spoke about his own daughters with disappointment. Even when no one said it directly, he could feel it in the way people looked at him. That feeling slowly turned into something darker. Each time he heard Ifunanya's name praised, it felt like an insult to him. Each time people admired her, it reminded him of everything his own daughters were not. Instead of correcting his household, he allowed that bitterness to grow. And without realizing it, that jealousy began to turn into something dangerous. It was during one of the village gatherings that Ifunanya met Obina, a young man who had just returned from the city. He was calm, well-spoken, and carried himself in a way that made people respect him instantly. He was not like the boys in the village, and that difference made him stand out. When he first spoke to Ifunanya, it was simple, but something about that moment stayed with both of them. As time passed, their conversations grew longer, and their connection grew deeper. Obina admired her calmness and the way she carried herself, while Ifunanya found comfort in his maturity and understanding. Their relationship grew naturally, without force, and soon people began to talk about them. What they had was real, and it was clear to everyone who paid attention. Before Ifunanya came into the picture, her cousins had already noticed Obinna, a man from the city, calm, responsible, and respected. He was exactly the kind of man they wanted. They tried in their own ways to get his attention, speaking boldly, dressing to be noticed, and placing themselves where he could see them. But Obinna was not interested. When he chose Ifunanya instead, it felt like an insult to them. Not only had he rejected them, but he had chosen someone they believed was beneath their level of boldness. Their pride could not take it. What they felt was no longer just attraction. It became anger mixed with jealousy. One evening, without Ifunanya knowing, her cousins went to meet Obinna. They entered his compound with smiles, greeting him as if they came with good intentions. They sat down and began to speak slowly, carefully, as if they were concerned about his future. They told him things that were not true. They said Ifunanya was cursed, that she would never give birth, that marrying her would destroy his life. Then they leaned closer and said something that carried their real intention. Leave her, marry from our house instead. Obinna looked at them, anger rising slowly in his chest. Without shouting, he stood up and told them to leave his house. That day, they walked away in silence, but their anger did not end there. When the girls returned home that evening, their faces were not the same as when they left. The smiles were gone, replaced with anger that they could not hide. Their father noticed it immediately. He did not ask at first, but he watched them, the way a man watches fire before it spreads. Later that night, they told him everything. How Obinna rejected them, how he defended Ifunanya, how he chose her without hesitation. Their words did not just enter his ears, they settled in his heart. The jealousy that had been growing quietly now found something to hold on to. It was no longer just about comparison or shame. It became personal. In his mind, it was not right that his own daughter would be the one to enjoy what his own daughters could not. And that night, something inside him changed completely. That same night, long after everyone had gone to sleep, he sat alone outside his house. The village was quiet, but his mind was not. Thoughts moved inside him like something alive, pushing him towards something he had never fully accepted before. He remembered every insult, every whisper, every look people had given him because of his daughters. He remembered how people praised his younger brother's home as if his own did not exist. By the time he stood up, his decision had already been made. If life had refused to favor him, then he would take control of things himself. He would not sit and watch his brother's house rise while his own fell. And from that moment, what he carried inside him was no longer jealousy. It became something darker, something that would not stop until it achieved what it wanted. Despite everything that happened behind the scenes, the marriage between Ifunanya and Obinna went on as planned. The village gathered, music played, and people celebrated with joy. Women danced, elders blessed them, and everyone believed they were witnessing the beginning of a peaceful life. It was a beautiful day filled with laughter and hope. Ifunanya entered her husband's house with happiness in her heart. She believed she was stepping into a life filled with love, support, and a future that would grow with time. Obinna treated her with care, and for a while, everything was exactly as it should be. No one could see what was already moving quietly behind their lives. The first year passed peacefully. There was no pressure, no questions, no reason to worry. Ifunanya focused on her home, her husband, and building her life as a wife. Obinna was patient, never rushing her, never making her feel uncomfortable. They lived simply, enjoying the peace they had. But when the second year came and nothing changed, people began to notice. At first, the questions were soft, almost harmless. "Any good news?" they would ask, smiling as if it was just a normal conversation. Ifunanya would smile back, nodding politely, even though she had no answer to give. Deep inside, a small fear had already begun to form. As time went on, the questions changed. They were no longer soft or careful. They became direct, sharp, and sometimes even careless. Women began to talk openly, no longer hiding their words. Some spoke as if they were helping, others spoke as if they were judging. Soon, the whispers followed. They spread quickly, moving from one person to another, growing louder with each passing day. The same word began to follow her everywhere she went. Barren. It started as a whisper, but it did not remain that way. In the middle of all this, Obinna did not change. That was what made everything even more emotional. While
distant, he remained present. He stood by her, spoke to her with patience, and refused to let the words of the village break what they had built. But even with his support, the pain did not disappear. Ifunanya felt it in ways she could not explain. It was in the way people looked at her, in the silence that followed conversations, and in the way her name was slowly replaced with something else. She began to carry a weight that no one could see, but everyone had placed on her. The worst part of everything did not come from strangers. It came from people she shared blood with. Her cousins did not hide their words anymore. They spoke openly, laughing whenever they saw her, making comments loud enough for others to hear. Some women are not meant to be mothers. Maybe the curse is real after all. They said these things with smiles, as if they were joking, but their eyes showed something else, something cold, something intentional. And each time Ifunanya heard them, it felt like something inside her was being torn slowly. One night, after returning from the market, where she had once again been humiliated, Ifunanya sat alone in her room. The house was quiet, but her mind was not. The words she had heard that day repeated themselves over and over again, refusing to leave her. For the first time, she cried without holding back. Not the quiet tears she was used to, but deep, painful cries that came from a place she could not control. It was not just about not having a child anymore. It was about everything. The shame, the words, the looks, the silence. And in that moment, she felt completely alone, even though she was not. After that night of tears, something changed inside Ifunanya. She did not suddenly become strong, and the pain did not disappear, but she made a quiet decision not to remain silent in her suffering. She began to pray more, not just casually, but with desperation. Early in the morning before the sun rose, she would sit alone, speaking words that came from deep inside her. At night, when everyone slept, she would continue, her voice low but heavy with pain. Obinna noticed the change and joined her. He did not understand everything, but he believed in something greater than what they were seeing. Together, they began to seek God seriously, not just as a routine, but as a last hope. They visited prayer houses again, but this time it was different. This time, they were not just asking for a child, they were asking for the truth. While Ifunanya and her husband were praying, something began to happen in another house. Her uncle, the same man who had quietly caused her suffering, started experiencing strange discomfort in his body. At first, it was small. Pains that came and went, weakness that he could not explain. He ignored it, thinking it was nothing serious. But the discomfort did not go away. it grew. What started as mild pain slowly became something unbearable. He could not sleep well, he could not eat properly, and no matter what he did, his body refused to respond. People began to notice, but no one understood what was happening. The same man who once walked with pride was now struggling with something no one could see. As his condition worsened, fear began to replace pride. He started remembering things he had tried to forget. Nights became longer and silence became louder. Each time he closed his eyes, his mind went back to what he had done, the places he had gone, and the decisions he made out of jealousy. His daughters watched him, confused and afraid. The same man who once spoke with authority now struggled to even sit up without pain. They took him to different places for help, but nothing worked. The more they tried, the worse it became. And slowly, it began to feel like something beyond sickness, something that was demanding to be revealed. One evening, unable to bear the pain any longer, he called his family together. His voice was weak, but the weight behind it was heavy. At first, no one understood what he wanted to say, but as he began to speak, the truth started to come out. He confessed everything. How jealousy had filled his heart, how he could not stand seeing his brother's peace, how he went secretly to destroy what he could not have, and finally, how he made sure Ifunanya would never have a child. The room fell silent. No one spoke. No one moved. Because what they had just heard was beyond anything they expected. News spread quickly through the village, faster than anything before it. People gathered not out of curiosity, but out of shock. The same people who mocked Ifunanya were now silent, unable to look her in the eyes. The truth had changed everything. Her cousins, who once laughed the loudest, could no longer speak. The words they used to hurt her now sat heavy in their own mouths. What they thought was her shame became theirs. And for the first time, the village saw clearly what had been hidden all along. After the truth came out, something shifted. The weight that had followed Ifunanya for years slowly began to lift. It did not happen in one day, but it happened. Peace returned, not just to her home, but to her heart. And then it happened. The same woman they called barren began to carry life. Not just one, but two. When the news spread, the village was silent again, but this time it was different. It was silence filled with realization. After everything she went through, do you think Ifunanya should forgive her uncle?